thought the snow would be my protector, a white wall keeping the chaotic world at bay. But I was wrong, so deeply wrong. It wasn't a wall, it was a shroud, and it didn't keep the danger out, it just locked me in with it. It was mid-January, and I had rented a small, isolated cabin in the heart of the Cascades.
They said he was alone
I
in the
needed
cabin.
silence, a
But as the
place to
typewriter
finish my
keys began
manuscript
to
without
move,
the hum
the
of city
darkness seemed
life.
to write.
The cabin was a single-room studio, barely 200 square feet of weathered wood and drafty windows. When I arrived, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of a record-breaking blizzard. By 6 p.m., the first flakes began to fall, thin and innocent. By 8 p.m., the world outside had vanished into a blinding, swirling white void. I felt safe. At first, I stoked the small wood-burning stove in the corner, listening to the comforting crackle of pine. The heat was a physical weight, pressing against the biting cold seeping through the floorboards. I sat on the edge of the bed, a heavy oak frame that looked like it had been there for a century. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not just a lack of noise, but a heavy, expectant silence. The kind of silence that makes you hear the blood rushing in your own ears. I fell asleep around midnight, lulled by the rhythmic whistling of the wind. But something woke me. It wasn't a loud noise, not a crash or a scream. It was a shift in the air, a subtle change in the room's temperature. I opened my eyes, staring up at the dark rafters. My breath hitched. The fire in the stove had died down to a dull, pulsing orange glow, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Then, I smelled it. The faint, metallic scent of wet wool and something else. Something earthy, like disturbed dirt. I sat up slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My eyes scanned the room, settling on the small wooden table near the window. There, sitting right in the center, was a white ceramic mug. A thin, ghostly wisp of steam was still curling up from its rim. I froze. I hadn't made tea. I hadn't even taken that mug out of the cupboard. I reached out, my hand trembling so hard I could barely control it. I touched the side of the mug. It was hot, burning hot. Someone had just poured this. Someone had stood right there, in the dark, while I was sleeping just 5 feet away. I scanned the room again, my vision blurring with panic. The door was still bolted from the inside. The windows were latched, covered in a thick crust of frost. There was nowhere to hide, or so I thought. The closet was empty. The small bathroom was vacant. I stood in the center of the room, my bare feet turning numb on the cold floor. The wind outside let out a mournful howl, shaking the entire cabin. And then, in the brief lull between the gusts, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound. Creak. It came from directly beneath me. A slow, deliberate pressure on the floorboards under the bed. I stopped breathing. I stared at the heavy quilt hanging over the side of the bed frame, obscuring the dark space underneath. The steam from the mysterious mug continued to rise, a silent witness to a presence I couldn't see. That was when the humming started. It was low, a vibration more than a sound, a tuneless, guttural melody that seemed to resonate through the very wood of the floor. It was coming from right under the mattress where I had been sleeping for hours. I felt a cold drop of sweat slide down my spine. I realized then that I wasn't alone in this cabin, and I never had been. The humming didn't stop. It was a rhythmic, buzzing sound, like a swarm of insects trapped in a wooden box. I stood frozen in the center of the room, my eyes locked on the edge of the bed quilt. The steam from the mug was gone now, leaving only a cold, dark ring on the table. I had to see. I had to know what was under there. I slowly dropped to my knees, the cold floorboards biting into my skin. My heart was beating so loud I thought it would wake the forest. I reached out a trembling hand and gripped the corner of the heavy blanket. I pulled it back, just an inch. Darkness. Total, impenetrable darkness. But then, As my eyes adjusted to the dim orange glow of the dying embers, I saw it. A pair of muddy, heavy boots. They were tucked neatly, side by side, right under the center of the bed. But the boots weren't empty. I could see the dark fabric of trousers tucked into them. Someone was lying flat on their back, perfectly still, staring up at the underside of the mattress I had just been sleeping on. I scrambled backward, letting out a strangled gasp. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. I hit the far wall, my hands searching blindly for the heavy iron fire poker near the stove. The humming stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It was heavy, suffocating. And then, the bed began to move. Not much, just a slight creak as the weight beneath it shifted. A hand reached out from under the bed. It was pale, with dirt caked under the fingernails. It gripped the edge of the wooden frame, the knuckles turning white with effort. I didn't wait to see the face. I grabbed my coat and lunged for the front door. My fingers fumbled with the heavy deadbolt, the cold metal sticking to my skin. I heard a soft, wet thud behind me, the sound of someone sliding out from under the bed and onto the floor. I threw the door open. The blizzard hit me like a physical blow, a wall of white ice and screaming wind. I didn't care. I plunged into the waist-deep snow, stumbling, falling, crawling toward where I thought my car was parked. I looked back once. The cabin door was still open, a rectangle of dim orange light in the darkness. Standing in the doorway was a tall, thin silhouette. He wasn't chasing me. He was just standing there, perfectly still, holding the white ceramic mug in both hands. He raised the mug, as if offering a toast, and then he started humming again. I reached my car, my fingers numb and blue as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine groaned, sputtered, and finally roared to life. I didn't look back again. I drove through the whiteout, my tires sliding on the hidden ice, until I reached the main highway an hour later. I called the police from a gas station. When they reached the cabin 3 hours later, the storm had already started to bury the tracks. They found the door wide open, the interior covered in a layer of fresh snow. The cabin was empty, but they found something that the officer told me later over the phone, his voice shaking. Under the bed, they found more than just muddy footprints. They found a small, hand-carved wooden doll. It was wearing a tiny scrap of fabric that matched the shirt I had been wearing that night. And taped to the underside of the mattress, right where my head had been resting, was a single blurry photograph. It was a picture of me, taken through the cabin window, 3 nights before I even arrived. He hadn't broken in while I was there. He had been waiting for me. I never went back for my manuscript. I never went back to the mountains. Even now, in my new apartment, in the middle of a crowded city, I find myself checking under the bed every single night. Because sometimes, when the wind hits the windows just right, I can still hear that low, guttural humming. And I know he's still out there, waiting for the next person to seek the silence of the snow. If you're ever tempted by a remote cabin for a quiet getaway, remember my story. Check the locks, check the corners, and for God's sake, never ever look under the bed. If you have a similar experience, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Horror so I have the motivation to keep telling these stories. Next week's story is even more insane than this one.